Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Very Connected podcast. And today we're being joined by Kayla Girgen. Kayla, say hey.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, you're one of my favorites here. I shouldn't say favorites because that doesn't, it really is true, but it doesn't give you just justice. I mean, we just work good together. I just love having you on, Kayla. She's been a guest on our podcast quite a few times now. And today, I love your new topic that you've been kind of segueing in, and it's on blood sugar regulation. So, conquering your snacking habit, nutrition insights, and blood sugar basics to prevent regain after weight loss surgery. And how important is that? Like, I'm just going to let you kind of start talking a little bit. And I didn't do a formal introduction. Tell us more about yourself and what you do and how you are able to help people.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Kayla Girgen. I am a registered dietitian. I've always worked in weight management. I would say specifically for the past 5 years, I've been in the bariatric space. I would say half of that was in a clinic. And more recently, the past 2.5 years has been kind of on my own, coaching folks and women after bariatric surgery. And I guess I kind of realized that weight loss isn't like this one size fits all answer. And as much as we want to think that it's one size fits all after bariatric surgery, it's really not. So that's where I really struggled in the clinic. I was handing out, basically a PDF of 12 different things to do before and after surgery. And I was like, this is so like impersonal. And I felt like for so many folks that just wasn't like resonating. And, if you've been in the clinic, sometimes it's like you feel like you're checking those boxes. And I basically went on my own just to kind of be out of the crunch of all the protocols, as bad as that might sound. But I also started to learn more about things like blood sugar management and really saw that with myself and with my clients, just using tools like CGM, which I'll talk about a little bit today, just how impactful that is. Like, I think for a number of reasons. We're going to talk about snacking today, but I also think things like emotional eating, like having some of those feedback mechanisms and the accountability that CGM provides is super, super helpful. But I think just getting that personalization as well. So I'm super excited to kind of mesh some of my favorite topics, snacking and CGM today, and just sharing some of the blood sugar basics too, because I think it's just not something we see in like a bariatric binder as well. So yes, and we'd love to
Yeah,
hear from you in the chat. Like if there's something in particular when it comes to like snacking habits, I would love to hear from you guys if there's like specific foods you crave, if there's a certain time of day. I think that just might help kind of guide the conversation here today. But yeah, it looks like we have some good representation.
yeah. Lots of people saying hi from all over. It looks like Montana. I see Seattle. And we're joining on Facebook here too. So I'm gonna cross on over and say hello to those people. Um, and oh, yes, they're talking about slider foods and snacking. Yes, it's a big thing. Now, Kayla, what got you interested in bariatric surgery and what brought you into this niche area as a dietitian?
That's a great question. I haven't had surgery myself. I have a lot of like family members, friends who've had surgery. But I think even surgery aside, I think something that I grew up seeing a lot of, or even something I've struggled with myself, is just a lot of that all or nothing thinking, or really the more I learned about food, the more I was confused. And that's kind of what sent me to be a dietitian, because I wanted to like investigate and I wanted to, have all the answers. And the more I learned, the more I realized I really didn't know. And then when it came to things like bariatric surgery, I think there's this really interesting component of you have that blend of, anatomy changes, but then also the mindset piece too. And I feel like so often that piece is really missing. And there's a lot of motivation, I think, to check again all those boxes leading up to surgery. Everything's very structured. Post-op, you've got your liquid diet and you've got your pureed and soft. And then all of a sudden you hit that 6-month mark or 12-month mark and you're like, oh my gosh, like what do I do now? And those old habits start to creep back. So I really love like working with women trying to figure out like, teasing out some of those emotional things, but then also getting to that point where you're both physically and emotionally satisfied when it comes to things like food and learning how to still eat things like your favorite foods, which we'll talk a little bit about today too. So I really think it's that blend of like anatomy change and the mindset piece. And I have to say too, with my gals after bariatric surgery, you guys are all very motivated too. It's like you made a really big decision and you don't want to screw it up, I think. And I think sometimes there's that shame if you feel like you're not doing things perfectly. And that's where I really love things like CGM or the glucose monitoring, because I think it really gives you that freedom to still be able to eat a lot of the things that you want, not be 100% perfect, and still see progress. So, yeah, my long answer to your question.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think monitoring your progress is a big piece, which I found I was sharing with Kayla before our call. Like this last year, I've kind of dove back into my own weight loss surgery journey. For those of you who are new to our podcast, I had weight loss surgery back in 2013, the VSG, and I lost about 80 pounds, hit my goal. And then, life happens over the next years. I had some weight regain, gained about 35, 40 pounds back. And then starting of July of last year, I kind of went back and started doing some things to try to get back on track. I did start one of the GLP-1s. I started a semaglutide medication. And I was sharing with Kayla, as of today, I've lost my regain plus another 5 pounds. So exciting. And started back into fitness, which has always been one of those things, kind of that all or nothing. I'll get into these phases where I'm like, okay, I'm all in and I'll do something for, months and then I'll kind of jump off. But I'm trying to get more consistent on that. So I've been working with some trainers and that's been super helpful. So no matter where you are, I know for me, the whole being on a medication that's specifically for insulin resistance has been helpful. And then also like knowing like those blood sugar spikes, I think that was a lot of it for me because my blood sugar would all over the place, and not having those, like, I think that's what makes us hungry a lot of times. So I know you're
Mhm.
going to get more into that. Let's jump into this. There is a ton of comments. You guys keep the comments coming, and we're going to kind of like in between kind of segue and take some of those comments and try to answer if there's questions or anything like that. But even if you just want to add to the conversation by your own experiences, which is what a lot of people are doing right now in the comments
Perfect.
on
Yes,
Zoom.
agreed. I love using the comments, and I'll try to keep my eyes on that as much as I can too. Let me just see. I know sometimes Zoom gets a little bit wonky when I want to go full screen here. So let me get my slides in full screen and then we'll get back to it. All right. And if you have questions along the way too, I know Brenda, you'll be keeping the eyes on the chat. Okay. We'll just kind of I'll scroll along here and can you see my slides okay?
Great. Yes.
Okay,
Wonderful.
perfect. But really, I wanted to touch on a couple things today. So grazing specifically. So this class is about snacking and grazing. I'll define that here in a little bit. We'll also look at a lot of the reasons why we eat. So whether that is some of those kind of wonky blood sugars going up and down, but then also we'll kind of touch a little bit on emotional triggers too. And then we'll wrap up with some solutions. Whatever time we have left over at the end, I would love to open it up for Q&A. But would love to hear from you guys in the chat. So you might have to teleport back to like an hour or two ago before you join this class, because you might know what I'm going to say based on what we've talked about so far. But let me know in the chat. What do you think? True or false? Eating small, frequent meals is best for weight loss. If I were to ask you this, say again, like maybe yesterday, what would you have said? Or I feel like this sometimes is advice that we see from surgical centers too. All right, true, true, true. Only a couple falses so far.
Mhm. And we
Um,
have one on Facebook that's false.
okay. All right. I would say it's pretty fair to say that I think the majority of people are saying true. And I will say that false. So I think that there's this kind of needs a little teasing out, being that we're kind of thinking that like post-op realm. I think there's definitely that time where immediately post-op, you're probably having to do a lot of small, frequent meals. But ultimately, I think that that can lead to grazing. So I like to think that small frequent meals can really be that gateway to grazing and ultimately weight gain. So we know that grazing is the number one reason for weight gain after bariatric surgery. And that's not me saying that, that's the literature. So if you think about grazing, that's really that constant nibbling throughout the day. So you're just kind of eating little bits. Maybe it's mindless snacking. Maybe you're just not feeling full. It could be for a variety of factors. So we'll, again, kind of wrap up with some solutions later today to help you with that. So if you question whether you're a grazer, you might think that maybe you're at work kind of nibbling, or you're at your computer or watching TV. A lot of times I think there is some physiology, but then there's also, I think, a lot of psychology behind it too, if it's tied to other habits. But really it's that constant nibbling. You're not really feeling full. You're kind of outrunning your restriction in a sense too. And just remember that you had surgery on your belly, not your brain. So I think too, it does take a little bit to tease out the physical and the emotional. And we'll kind of attack that from a couple different angles today too, to hit on both of those. But I think it's also important to mention too. So other factors for regain, frequently eating past full. I wouldn't say that that's because you stretched your stomach per se, but more so that you bypass a lot of those hormonal signals. So once you start ignoring some of that, I'm hungry, I'm full, it gets really hard to kind of trust yourself and tie back into that. Not weighing. So not weighing on the scale, that is a big one too. I know there can be mixed feelings about the scale, but I think too, if you don't know where you're at, maybe take this as your gentle reminder that sometimes just facing the music can be really helpful so you know where you're at and starting. So if you've been purposely avoiding the scale because you don't want to know, again, you know you best, but sometimes it just helps to kind of see where you're at, and you might be better off than you think. I don't know if it was one of the classes that we did together, Brenda, but I think I had somebody go, "Thank you. I hopped on the scale afterwards and I only gained 2 pounds or something." And she thought it was going to be a lot worse, but that can be really helpful. It's just a way to measure another data point. Physical inactivity is another piece. So a lot of times it's like now we're kind of sitting on Zoom calls. Everything's very, screen based. So we're definitely not moving as much as we used to. And then lastly, untreated psychological disorders can be another thing that leads to regain after surgery. But kind of zooming in on grazing specifically. So this is an example here of one of my clients who is using CGM, or continuous glucose monitoring. So if you've seen someone who's maybe wearing that sensor on the back of their arm or on your belly, depending on the type, basically what that's doing is it's measuring your blood sugar in real time. The alternative to that is doing kind of finger pricks, which is painful and it's really inconvenient. But the glucose monitor really shows us, like, what is your blood sugar doing? How are you reacting to certain meals? And as you can see here on the top line, this is when we first started working together. So we've got 3 meals and 4 snacks. So just kind of always eating, every 1 to 2 hours. And you can see just this like up, down, up, down, up, down. Oftentimes your energy, your mood, your appetite will follow that trend. So by getting more of the rolling hills like you see on the bottom, again, we'll talk through solutions to help get from point A to point B. But by getting more of that rolling hills versus those mountain peaks, you're going to notice a world of difference in your appetite, your energy, and I think ultimately your weight loss results too, whether you're working on continuing to lose weight, or if you're working on maybe getting something like some regain off, or you've hit a stall. So I might just step back and say, like, taking a big picture at how many meals and snacks are you doing? I know 3 meals and 1 snack isn't, realistic for everyone, but we'll talk about the frequency a little bit here too. So
And
maybe,
Kayla, I'm writing
yeah,
down there is some
yeah,
questions or just
yeah,
comments that come in. Um, you tell me whenever you're ready and we'll take a few here and there.
yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, so this is a little ways back. Can artificial sweeteners and skinny syrups mess with your insulin levels?
That's a good question. I don't see it. I would say like what we see on like CGM, so that kind of that green line I was showing with your blood sugar, we're kind of guesstimating what your insulin is doing. It really varies. we can tell only so much based on what your blood sugar is doing, but we're kind of inferring what insulin is doing. Oftentimes you don't see a lot of artificials maybe impact your blood sugar or your insulin as much as you might think. But I think for some people, they can still lead to more sweet cravings. But I would say when it comes to things like artificial sweeteners, I think it's the lesser of two evils when we compare to that to something like, regular sugar. One, because you need so little. So a lot of times, like artificial sweeteners are, 200 to thousands of times sweeter than real sugar. So you need really, really tiny amounts to make up for that same sweetness. So to be honest, usually artificial sweeteners are at the bottom of the totem pole for things that I look for, unless somebody's doing all of the right things and still really struggling with cravings. All right, what
That's a
else?
great question.
Yeah.
Okay. So there was some of these are just comments, like craving salty and sweets. Anything to say about that? Like if you are craving one over the other, or what would you recommend with those type of cravings?
Yeah, I do have a couple of slides, I think, on that. I would say one of the biggest things is if you can minimize like the big spikes and drops, that can be, and I think I actually have, let me see if I have the um image here. I'm just going to pull up my slides just to give a little visual again. But if I zoom in here, like when it comes to cravings, I would say specifically for something like carbs or sweets, where we really see a lot of cravings come in is on these when your blood sugars are basically plummeting back to earth. So the good news is a lot of that's preventable if we can even you out a little bit. Oftentimes I hear that cravings go down significantly and your taste buds do adapt a little bit. But when we avoid these really sharp drops, you will notice a world of difference, especially for like sweets and carbs. When it comes to things like salt in particular, I've had some people who even supplement with something like electrolytes, especially this time of year, doing something like sugar-free IV or Gatorade or Powerade Zero. Sometimes it might not be the chips that you're craving, but maybe it's the salt. So sometimes I think that electrolytes can really help with some of those specifically too.
Okay. Um, Hard to find a variety of things to add and prevent starvation. So I guess like, are you going to be talking about what kind of snacks and what kind of meals? Okay, we're
I
gonna we're
do.
gonna get
Yep.
more on that.
Yep.
Um, Hormonal changes with that time of the month, like female cycles.
Yes, that's an excellent question. Because what I tend to see too is that one, usually that week before your cycle, there's a reason you're craving, just because of that change in hormone. So oftentimes your metabolism does go up slightly that week before your cycle. And for some people, that means maybe they have to incorporate something like an extra snack, maybe a couple extra 100 calories. And it's a really great time to focus on extra protein, extra healthy fats, which I'll talk a little bit about, because those are the things that are the nicest, I'll say, to your blood sugar. So usually that week before your cycle, you're more vulnerable because one, your metabolism's revving up a little bit. And two, you tend to be a little bit more insulin resistant too. And that's just because of those hormonal things. So as much as you might be craving some of those processed foods, trying to do your best to fill up on like quality versus quantity, doing more whole foods, healthy fats, and fiber can really help. So,
Hey, there is more, but I'd say keep going, and
okay.
I'm writing questions down, guys, as they come in. I see on Facebook. We're gonna keep going, guys, but we
Okay.
will try to answer as many as we can. I'm
Yeah,
just gonna keep writing them down.
I might answer some of them here in
The presentation,
upcoming
probably.
coming up here too. But I think just to back up too, when we talk about blood sugar, I kind of alluded to it a little bit. But really why we want to have something like balanced blood sugar. I think weight loss is ultimately a byproduct, but oftentimes I see people have more energy. So again, if you're avoiding those high highs and those low lows, specifically those really drastic drops, you're not going to see really big energy slumps. Even with what you'd say is like a low calorie or like healthy food or snack, for example. So I had one gal She was wearing her CGM. We were trying to get to the bottom of her, like every afternoon. She'd hit 2 o'clock and she's like, I almost have to nap at my desk. And we were checking on what she was eating, and she was having every afternoon a rice cake with sugar-free whipped cream. So I think in total, calorie-wise, probably looking at maybe 60, 75 calories max. However, how those calories were impacting her blood sugar, she was like soaring out of our target range. She was crashing really, really hard. And so we just tweaked that afternoon snack, and we, really resolved her afternoon energy slump. She had, more energy. She had less cravings. And what we were finding is when she was, coming down really hard, that's when those cravings kick in. So I think I have another slide here. I'll kind of speak a little bit more to that. But really, when we crash, that can be a bigger predictor of how many calories we eat as well. But when you have less cravings too, I had one gal who had a similar kind of experience to the slide I just shared here. So for example, we when we first started working together, she was just like up, down, up, down, up, down. Once we got her evened out a little bit, she said that her food noise was, wildly different. So even outside of things like medications, those are definitely helpful. But I think that there are some like nutritional things that we can do to even out those blood sugars. Those medications definitely help even a lot of people out too. And that's where a lot of times that energy, the cravings, and then oftentimes you notice that you sleep better. So when you're able to sleep better, that has a world of difference on your mood, how you're able to handle both physical and emotional stressors. And I really don't think that we emphasize how much things like sleep and stress impact weight loss, because when we're burning the candle at both ends. I see it on my CGM when I wear it, or I see it on my clients. Even one night of bad sleep and their blood sugar spikes a lot more. It spikes a lot higher, even to, foods that they normally tolerate really well. So sleep and stress can make a really, really big difference. All right. So how do we get to snacking, right? Like if you feel like you're snacking all the time, what gets us there? So I think a few things that set the stage. I have to talk about hydration because we're in the summer months. I've been surprised at how many people struggle with drinking enough water this time of year. So I mentioned electrolytes earlier. I think that those can really help, but we can mistake thirst for hunger. So usually that's kind of line of defense number one is, are you drinking enough water? Protein, I won't, hound on that too much today because I feel like we really talk about that a lot post-op. What I will say is that I see a lot of recommendations, like 60, 65 grams from some surgical clinics, and I just think that's too low. So what we know is that, at a population level, looking at 60, 65 grams a day, that's enough to prevent protein deficiency, but it's not really the amount that we want to like feel optimal. So I usually say if you can get to 80, 100 grams, you're probably going to feel one, a lot better. You're probably going to see, a lot less urges to snack. If you need things like shakes and bars to get there, like by all means, I think that those things are really great insurance to help meet those protein goals. So I haven't had surgery. I have to do a shake a day to hit like 100 grams of protein. It's otherwise it takes a lot of work if you're trying to do it from whole food, especially if you have a tiny tummy. And then low fat diet. So I see that, some surgery centers, again, not everybody, I think we're kind of coming around on, the fat train here. But if you kind of grew up with the SnackWells and low fat everything and margarine, this can be a little bit of a tough mindset shift. But ultimately, fat is one of those macronutrients that is probably the nicest on your blood sugar. So fat and fiber specifically can really help with feeling full. So if you find yourself opting for a lot of like reduced fat or fat-free options, even just experimenting with going from, say reduced fat cheese to full fat, one, it tastes a lot better. Two, you're probably going to find that you're a lot more physically and emotionally satisfied too. So I don't know if anybody's had experience just upping, like my favorite indulgence now is like 4% cottage cheese. Like, my gosh, that tastes so good compared to full fat cottage cheese. And I guarantee it'll keep you feeling fuller a lot longer. Definitely worth maybe the few extra calories that you take in as well. All right, one more, and then maybe we'll pause a little bit for some questions, Brenda. But a
Yeah.
few other things that lead to snacking. One thing that I, talk about maybe on a daily basis with my clients is transitional habits. And what I mean by that are some of those like sticky times of day. So if you notice like, okay, after work when I'm going from, maybe you have a home office and then you're venturing to the kitchen to make dinner, maybe that's a tough spot is like after work. Or I see it for a lot of you with kiddos, like the kids are in bed. This is my me time. I get to sit down and finally connect with my spouse for the day. You don't want that time to end. Or you don't have to share your food with, little kiddos. And it's just those transitional habits, whether again, it's from like work to, mom mode or home, or that transition to, putting the kids to bed, that evening time and that relaxation, thinking about those transitions during your day, if snacking is, a part of some of those habits, which I think overlaps a little bit too with the emotional eating. I think we had some comments about things like stress eating. And I think that those stress eating and those transitional habits, again, can overlap quite a bit. So teasing those out. One book I'll recommend is called When Food is Comfort. I'm reading that with my group right now. So When Food is Comfort by, I believe it's Julie Simon. I had it recommended by Rodolfo, who some of you may know well, and then also a bariatric therapist that's local here. And it just talks about really how to satisfy those emotional needs that don't involve food. So it's an emotional eating book that I've read that has the least amount to do to talk about like nutrition and things. It really hones in on, what are you really hungering for emotionally and how to satisfy those things without soothing with food. So good book so far. It's a little heavy, so you might have to kind of work through it in bits and chunks, but definitely really helpful. And then lastly, food choices. So we talked a little bit about this, but I would say ultimately some of those more processed foods, slider foods, I think somebody had messaged about, things like carbohydrates, sugary foods. If you find yourself craving a lot of those, you're oftentimes going to see again that up and down in those mountain peaks in your blood sugar, and it can be a bit of a vicious cycle. So once you hop on that blood sugar roller coaster, especially if say you're starting your day like most Americans do, we don't have a ton of protein in the morning. Maybe we're having a toast or, a sugar sweetened yogurt or fruit and a bagel. We're kind of layering all of these carbohydrates, and that really sets us up to fail for the rest of the day. But I'll talk about how to incorporate these things too without, being perfect, without sending your blood sugars, off the rails too. But before we get into solutions, maybe I'll pause here because I see we've got the chat box filling up.
No, there's so many. It's keeping me busy over here writing these
Yes.
questions down. So this is a Facebook one. And there's several different comments. Actually, there's maybe 3 or 4 that's kind of centered around timing of food, like eating. Um, how would you answer, like, if somebody, for example, one of these is they eat at 4 p.m. If earlier they get hungry and tired, or um, you know, keeping, I guess let's go ahead and answer that one because,
Yeah. So is it like specifically asking like a certain cutoff time? Like,
well, I think she's more commenting about it,
okay.
but just saying that that's her normal thing is she usually eats around 4 p.m. If she eats earlier, she stays hungry. So I don't know. I mean, how would you say for different people? Because there's a lot of people that are doing intermittent fasting and different things like that
Mhm.
too.
Yeah, I would say, like talking about meal timing and in particular, if you feel like you are like a grazer or snacking or eating every 1 to 2 hours, I would say first, don't expect to go from constantly grazing all day to 3 meals a day. That's not realistic. And I think you really might struggle or white knuckle. So I think even just like increasing the time between your eating occasions can really help. And we'll talk about like strategies to help you not white knuckle it from one meal to the next. um, I will say when it comes to like eating too early or too late, having like specific food windows, usually I don't have like a, stop eating by 7 p.m. or anything. I would say just to keeping in mind that your sleep is a good indicator. So if you're having a heavy meal right before bed, I feel like now it's summertime, we're out later, maybe you're doing yard work, not eating until late, or you have social occasions, just keeping in mind that, you don't want to sacrifice sleep as well, because as we know, that can be a bit of a vicious cycle. So if you need something like a snack before bed, just make it like what I usually say is like light and savory. And that usually helps to kind of keep your blood sugar stable overnight. But I think that timing is really going to vary from person to person and depend on, what that meal consists of beforehand too. I don't know if I fully answered that question, but
No, I think, and I guess it wasn't so much a question, more or less,
yeah.
just I was more curious of what your thoughts were, um,
Yeah,
of
'cause
when
I will
people.
say I'll maybe add to that too, like if it's talking about like cutoff times or like eating windows, for example. I think intermittent fasting can be a great tool, especially when it comes to things like insulin resistance. However, I will say that when you have a tiny tummy and you're trying to get 100 grams of protein a day, I'd really hate to sacrifice you not hitting your protein goals to eat in a specific window. So protein always comes first. And I would say too, with things like intermittent fasting specifically, um, if you're under a lot of stress, then that's maybe not the time to do something like fasting or even widening that eating window, if you will. So I think most of us do pretty well if we're eating in, even say a 12-hour window. You're having breakfast at 7, you're wrapping up your last meal by 12. Again, it might be a little bit different based on your schedule. I think it's definitely possible, but again, I wouldn't sacrifice your not hitting your protein just so you can, eat within a specific eating window.
So how do you feel somebody, what the very last question is examples of light and savory night
Yeah,
snacks,
I do have
since you just
some.
talked about that?
Yeah, I think I have in a few slides here. I do have some snack examples, so we can look at that. But one thing I don't think I have on that slide is like one of my favorites is even doing like a little bento box. So maybe it's like cheese and nuts, like vegetables, like kind of doing something that maybe feels like a little snacky, like a little mini charcuterie, if you will. So something like that I think can be really nice, especially if you're one of those where it's a nighttime habit, you're sitting down to watch TV. Again, you might have to tease out, is this like head hunger or is this like, okay, I'm hungry? But I have seen too with like CGM, for example, I've seen a lot of like gals after surgery who kind of their blood sugar tanks in the middle of the night and they wake up and they can't fall back asleep. So we've actually incorporated like say a light and savory snack, like something like the mini charcuterie, and they're able to like one, if they do wake up, they're able to fall asleep faster. So I think that having like stable blood sugars overnight can really help sleep. Yes, hummus. Somebody had said hummus. That's a great one. Maybe pairing that up with something, like some vegetables, for example, some maybe a little bit of cheese.
And there's quite a few comments related to cold foods, like craving cold foods. Have you heard, maybe,
I haven't. I
I
would think
guess,
like this time of year, like the heat is the first thing that comes to mind. Um, or even like that's interesting. I don't know that I've heard that before, but I know when it like thinking about waking up and like temperatures, like even maybe experimenting with different temperatures in your bedroom. So to get into some of those like deeper sleep stages, oftentimes we do need colder temperatures too. So that's kind of like our body's cue is when your room starts to cool down or your body temperature drops, you can that's really what tells us like, hey, we can get into that deep sleep now.
I'm gonna ask one more. There's a bunch. I have probably 10 more questions here, but
Okay.
I'm gonna just allow you to keep going. But I just one more. The CGM machine, do you have to have a prescription for that? Is one of the questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. So CGM right now in the States, you do have to have a prescription. So you can get it like through your doctor. If your doctor doesn't prescribe it, you can get it through a lot of third-party companies. So I use Bari, for example, with my clients, and they take care of all of the prescriptions. However, at the end of the summer, we will hopefully see a few over-the-counter CGMs hit the market. So I think Dexcom Stello is one, and then Abbott is another manufacturer. I can't remember the name of theirs, but we're hoping by end of summer you'll be able to get them without a prescription. So yeah, The United States is really the only one that's doing that right now, unfortunately. All right. So I will share my slides. So I think we'll be coming up on some examples here. So I hope this will answer some of the questions that have come up too. But when we talk about um, carbs in particular. So trying to avoid some of those really drastic like spikes. So what I'll say here is on the red line. So imagine eating a carbohydrate all by itself. So think crackers, popcorn, bread, fruit would even fall into this category. That tends to be primarily carbohydrate. So yes, fruit is a healthy food, but it can still spike your blood sugar. So what we want to avoid is this really sharp like crash, because what we're seeing is some studies are showing that how fast your blood sugar comes down is actually a greater predictor of how many calories you eat. Outside of like what we report for hunger, how many grams of protein you had for breakfast, anything like that. So if we can get more like this blue line, again, those rolling hills versus mountain peaks, there's some really easy things that you can do to help blunt some of those responses. So I think Brenda, you had maybe mentioned earlier, you just felt like up and down and up and down. And we talk so much about like what we should eat, like what to eat, what not to eat. And we want food lists and things like that. And yes, those things can be helpful, but I think we don't always talk about how we eat. And just by pairing things like, say if you're having even a cookie on its own versus a cookie with something like a Greek yogurt, you're going to see a wildly different glucose response and not have to restrict, restrict, restrict. So an example here would be, again, maybe it's crackers, maybe it's cheese and crackers, or maybe it's fruit in the red, and then maybe it's Greek yogurt and fruit. So those different meal combinations, like pairing your carbs, just trying not to have them alone can make a world of difference on bringing that, when we looked at the beginning, that up, down, up, down, up, down, back into more of a smooth kind of pattern. So another way to cushion your carbs is just saving them for last. So not saying that we can't have carbs. I feel like when we talk about things like carbohydrates, that tends to be one, what people snack on the most. And it's the most tempting because we feel like we can't have them after surgery, but you can. Again, it's just maybe how we pair them. Saving them for last is another one. So these two screenshots are from a client on the same day. And she was on vacation this day in particular. So she basically went to brunch, had the world's best desserts in front of her. And she was able to, on the left-hand side, you'll see really minimal rise in her blood sugar, and she still was able to enjoy dessert. And how she did that is she started with protein, she had some veggies next, and then ended with her carbs, including something like dessert. So you'll see that she stayed within range. And I should just say that the goal isn't to just have a flat line for your blood sugar level or this green line, but really we just want to stay in range more often than not. Because again, you'll notice and become more intuitive when you notice, hey, I ate that, and now I feel kind of, shaky. Or if you have something like a big spike and then a drop, you can actually become hypoglycemic, and those are really scary symptoms. But the good news, again, we can prevent that. So to contrast that, so the first one, she's saving her carbs for last. Later in the day, she went out for dinner. You can see she was starting to come down right here, kind of around that like 7 to 8 o'clock mark. And then she, I believe she went to a show and she had like something sweet or carby. I can't remember. I want to say it was like a theater biscuit. Um, but you'll see that she was starting to come down, and then just having a carbohydrate all by itself, she got quite a big rise and then really started to fall again. And again, these drastic falls, that's when you oftentimes feel hungry shortly after eating. Your energy might crash. You just might feel really lousy overall. So just by buttoning those carbs up, having them after a meal, that can really help, or again, not having them on their own. And then I have one more here, and then we can pause again. I think I shortened up the presentation because I feel like we were going to have a lot of questions. So we should have plenty of time to get to some of those. But the last solution, so we talked about cushioning your carbs by just having them with something else. Number two, saving your carbs for last. Another thing that I see after surgery is that, again, with things like grazing, you're just kind of nibbling on these small amounts throughout the day, and you're really outrunning your restrictions. So what I mean by that is you're not getting that, what I like to call a gentle stretch on your stomach. So I know that's a really scary word after surgery, but when you get a little bit more volume at once, or what I like to say, a gentle stretch, where you're just getting a little bit of a baby tug on your stomach, you have receptors on the walls of your stomach. And when those do stretch, that's really what tells your brain, hey, I'm full. So when you're just eating these small amounts throughout the day, you're really bypassing that. You're not getting those physical cues that say, hey, I'm full, and sending that signal to your brain. So just by eating a little bit more volume at once, after protein, I would say getting plenty of fiber. That's where you can get a lot of volume. I'll have a resource I'll share with you too to help kind of give you ideas for protein and healthy fats and fiber, and kind of lay all those out for you. But again, aiming for that gentle stretch. These are text messages that I got from one of my clients, and she was just grazing all day long. And one thing that we did, we focused on protein, of course, but then we really started to work on her volume and the mental capacity that she had just by adding more volume. She didn't have to plan as many meals and snacks because she could actually make it from one meal to the next just by doing more protein, doing a little bit more volume, and actually feeling more satisfied. So it can be a very, rewarding sensation when you actually just try even a little bit more volume without changing even, the macros that you're eating or calories. Just doing a little bit more at once makes a huge difference. So, all right, before we go into snack ideas, is there anything like pertinent that came up?
Well, I think you kind of have with having the snack ideas, that's going to be good because there's quite a few questions around snacks and ideas.
Perfect.
One of them also is vegetarian and has
Okay.
a problem with anemia. So hopefully it'll touch on that.
I
And
can talk to that a little bit. Yeah, I think I just have like a few more slides left. So I'll wrap
okay,
up and then we'll dive
take
fully into
questions.
Q&As. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. I just want to emphasize too that there is a difference between having a snack and grazing all day. So I realize that like 3 meals a day just isn't realistic for everyone. I often see like maybe for most people post-op, as you get further out from surgery, you're able to tolerate more volume at once. So don't be scared by that, because I think that again, that can really help with satisfaction. But I also think that it can help just with planning. When you're not thinking about what you're going to eat every 2 hours, you have a lot more mental capacity to think about other things. So with that said, I would say there's a difference between constantly nibbling and actually like sitting down and having a planned snack. So if you're looking for some ideas, some of these I would say would kind of fit that light and savory if you're looking for something in the evening. Thinking about evenings in particular too, I know that's when a lot of people tend to struggle. And I'll actually kind of work with some of my clients to have like what I like to call, for lack of a better term, like a damage control snack. Like, let's have something planned so that way we don't just kind of tell yourself no all night and go completely off the rails, start again tomorrow, start again Monday, or whatever day of the week we're on. So I think even just having a planned snack can really help. But like the first one here, doing like Greek yogurt with walnuts or any sort of nuts, you've got some protein, you've got some healthy fats. Again, fats can really help keep you fuller longer. Next, even just pairing something like fruit, which is primarily a carbohydrate, up with something like cheese, or again, like Greek yogurt's a good option. Um, Nut butters, and somebody had asked about hummus, like those make great snacks too, pairing them up with like veggies or fruit, pickle or meat and cheese roll-ups. I will say one of my favorite snacks is to do like the roasted chickpeas. I'm lazy, so I just buy the ones that are already made. But usually I do like roasted chickpeas, those little like cheese wisps, and then add in some like roasted nuts. And it's a really great blood sugar friendly snack that travels well. It won't melt in the summer. So if you like more of that like savory or salty snacks, that can be a really quick and easy option too, whether you do the individually packaged or make your own. And then I have to hit on this one. My favorite right now is cottage cheese caprese. So if you take cottage cheese, tomatoes, basil, a little balsamic, it's like I'll eat that for breakfast, lunch, and dinner someday. So yeah, it's a good meal or a snack, whatever you want to make it. So I feel like the definition of a meal and snack definitely changes after surgery. So, who's all had cheese for a meal, right? Um, but yes, those are just a few ideas. And then what did I mention earlier? Like the little bento box, those can be really helpful too. All right. I'll touch on the next couple and then we'll dive right into questions. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more. I saw some questions coming in about CGM. So what that is again is just that sensor that you wear on the back of your arm. And instead of doing something like a finger prick, you basically get real-time readings of your blood sugar. So with tests like A1C, before this call, I just came off one of my group calls and we were talking about the different tests. And with things like A1C, sometimes you have really high highs in terms of blood sugar and you have really low lows, and those can cancel out and make it look like you have a normal A1C. So I think A1C is great because it's a really convenient test. You don't have to fast for it. It tells us kind of long term what your blood sugar looks like. However, I think there are some things that it misses. And somebody had mentioned kind of iron deficiency or anemia. If you are one of those folks, which oftentimes we see after surgery where you have low iron stores, sometimes you can actually have a falsely elevated A1C because your hemoglobin, or your red blood cells where we're taking that measurement from aren't turning over quite as quickly. So some of the other nutrition deficiencies can play into A1C, so that would be maybe another limitation. So with CGM, we're able to see things in real time, how you respond to individual foods, which can really help customize. So I mentioned a few examples earlier. Stress and exercise and sleep all make a difference. So even beyond food, it really just lets us see. I've had some people who've been wildly surprised by how much just stress impacts their blood sugar. Or I've had one client who is very emotional. So she even just by watching a movie that was, really intense, she's like, it never made me feel good. But I sat down, I watched this movie with my husband and I messaged her. I was like, did you have something last night? Like, did you forget to log a meal? And she's like, no, I was watching a movie. It was really emotional. And her blood sugar was like, reacted more than had she had, food. So we saw really big spikes just from stress alone. I see it with teachers. So I see that they're during the school year, oftentimes their blood sugar runs higher versus the summer when they're not dealing with students. Nurses is another good example. I see, dealing with Brenda, like if you're dealing with a difficult patient, you're on high alert. And I see big spikes just from scenarios like that too. So even beyond food, CGM really helps us see like your lifestyle as a whole. And then lastly, for the one-on-one folks I work with, the accountability is huge. So when you know that, again, for lack of a better term, somebody's watching, I think it can really help. And I think we can really troubleshoot things in real time versus like, oh, well, we're going to meet in a few weeks and then we'll talk about it. We can kind of text and maybe, talk about things like cushioning your carbs or saving carbs for last and really talk through those scenarios while they have their sensor on. But really, in fact, I don't have people change anything for their first sensor because I think that just seeing how your current habits and food choices impact your blood sugar is wildly helpful. So for the first 2 weeks, we're just wearing the sensor, getting used to what your current habits are doing. Then we're doing some experimenting. But most CGMs will last 10 to 14 days. And then you just kind of rip them off. It's not real fun ripping them off. They're really easy to put on. But then you can, replace them as much as you want or as much as maybe what your insurance will provide. I think we had questions about like prescription. You do need a prescription now. Again, whether you get that through your doctor or a third party company like Bari, is up to you. You're welcome to message me too, and I can help you, figure out where to go if you're not getting the help maybe from your doctor that you want. But I will say some diagnoses. So if you have something like diabetes or even reactive hypoglycemia, I think I saw a couple people in the chat box who are really struggling with hypoglycemia. If you have that documented, there's a better chance that something like insurance will pay for your sensors. Otherwise, out of pocket, you're probably looking for, maybe $80 to $100 per sensor, depending again on whether or not insurance will cover. But with that, I'll just maybe open it up after this. I just wanted to put a little plug in too, if you feel like some of the topics today really resonated with you. I did just open, I think, what was it, less than 48 hours ago. Just relaunched my bariatric back on track program. So you're one of the first to know, but this is really just a 30-day program. You kind of walk through modules, and I share and condense all of the things that I do with my one-on-one clients into certain modules. So we talk about blood sugar basics, we talk about protein, we talk about all or nothing thinking. So really a combination of both nutrition and mindset there too. So I'll drop a link for that in the chat box if you're interested in learning more. Otherwise, my Instagram DMs are always open if you have questions. But just a really great community based program to help get some of the resources. You've got lifetime access as I update a lot of these modules too. And then this is my very last slide, I promise. But I just love this quote because I think this is really how snacking kind of creeps up after weight loss surgery. So I didn't mean to gain weight, but it happened by snackcident. So I think it's one of those habits that kind of starts to creep back slowly. So just know that you're not alone in that. But all right, I will share some resources here in the chat, and then Brenda, let's open her up for questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Kayla, you said you were going to share something, or did you want me to share my screen to share?
I've got it right here. I can pop
Okay.
it in the chat. So let me see that I can share with everyone. Perfect. So I just put a few things in the chat. So I have a free grocery list download that will come with a little email series, kind of walking you through the different macronutrients. The second link is for the Back on Track program that I shared about. And then if you're interested in working together one-on-one, there is a link to apply for that as well. But
And if
yes.
anybody's listening to the replay, if at some point this will be on replay. So if you're listening to a replay, this will be in the description on our YouTube and also our podcast that we offer. Kayla, I'll have these also, the free grocery down list and back on basics, bariatric back on track program, and how to apply to work with Kayla. So those will all be available for you as well in the descriptions.
Perfect. All right.
Okay.
And I'll start kind of perusing the chat. I know you were frantically writing down all the questions though, so I don't know if
I
you noticed any
was.
common themes. Yeah.
I have so I'm looking, I'm gonna kind of read over my list here as we go through
Okay.
them, because some of these I think you've answered. Do you have to be, you've already answered this really. Do you have to be diabetic to use the CGM
That is no. So I know that
or hypoglycemic?
yeah, I get that question a lot too. Like, why, if I don't have diabetes, like, why use something like CGM? And I would say that something like diabetes is a progression. So I think something like CGM, and even some of like your generic kind of protein or your glucose tests, I mean, really, it's not like your blood sugar hits a certain level and it's like, oh, you have diabetes. It, slowly happens over time. And I think that using something like CGM is just wildly helpful to prevent something like that or reverse if you notice like things like insulin resistance, wonky blood sugars, low energy. It can really just help dial in. It's not something you have to do for a lifetime either. So I will say too that usually the first like 1 to 2 sensors is the most helpful. Some people like it again for the accountability beyond that, but even that first month or so is really where you're probably going to learn the most. So it's not like you're committing to a lifelong thing. It's like maybe you're just experimenting a little bit to see how food and exercise and stress impact your blood sugar.
That can be really helpful, like
Mhm.
knowing that. Um, there was a question about protein and shakes, not like any kind of liquid protein, not really satisfying the hunger. in how to get protein in during the day. Like if you're, so do you recommend supplements? And do you have recommendations on how to keep those make those fill you up a little more?
Yeah, I will say when it comes to things like protein shakes, they're convenient. And like another guideline I have for like a lot of my gals is like if you can get 30 grams of protein with your first meal of the day, whether that's breakfast or, a late morning kind of brunch or lunch, if you can get 30 grams with your first meal, that's really what kind of turns on that like muscle preservation or muscle building switch. And sometimes that's hard if you're getting it through whole food. So for example, that's like 5 or 6 eggs. And, I haven't had surgery and I can't eat 6 eggs at once. That's a lot of eggs. But I think protein supplements can surely help with that. Again, if you're, grabbing something quick and going, even pairing that up with something like a string cheese or something with more fiber, like something like fruit, for example, just having something with that shake, I feel like can give you a little bit more substance. Or I've seen people are so creative now, like even adding like protein powder to Greek yogurt or Greek yogurts. I feel like now you can get the somebody shared last night, I think like the ratio Greek yogurts are like 25 grams. So it's crazy how much protein you can even get like in a Greek yogurt nowadays. So thinking about different food combinations, even like sweetening your oatmeal with something like protein powder or protein shake can be kind of some sneaky ways to do that.
How do you feel about pouch resets? That was one of the questions.
Oh, I think we need like an extension on this call. I would say that pouch resets I don't love because I think again it's really hard to stretch your stomach. And I think going back to some of those really strict kind of immediately post-op guidelines really feeds into that all or nothing. I feel like people find that they're very restricted. And kind of similar to that previous question is like a lot of times protein shakes just don't keep you full as long. So I don't know that we don't have any evidence that they work. If anything, I know we tend to resort to things like that because it gives us a lot of structure. We have, pretty clear guidelines on what to eat, what not to eat. And, I know that's really tempting to go back to something like that, but I think in the long run, it's really a test of willpower, and that is not in your favor. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's more about lifestyle, like you're making lifestyle changes. Now,
Yeah.
one comment here that I love is the proffies, which means mixing, protein powders with your coffee. And I will say a lot of them are made with whey protein. I know ProCare Health is our sponsor, and we do have several different types of protein. And we've had protein coffee bars at retreats before. And I would stand there with a little hand mixer because you almost have to have a little mixer because the whey will curd if you mix it when it's really hot, or mix it with a little water and then mix it with your coffee. Like something more room temperature, mix it well, and then mix it in. So,
Yeah, I will say too, I've
okay.
done like chocolate milk. So with like the ProCare, I'll do like the chocolate milk. And then in the winter months, like when we have a change of temperatures here, I'll do like warm it up. And then it's like you have like protein hot chocolate and it's so satisfying. So especially if you struggle at night with like sweets, I feel like that's like the perfect nighttime, like something rich and chocolatey at night is really good.
That's a great suggestion. I hadn't thought about that. And you guys, milk, I didn't realize this, but milk is very hydrating. If you can tolerate it well, it's actually can be a little even more hydrating than water if you are okay with dairy. Some people have dairy issues, but
And even
um
lactose-free milk, I think there's a lot more like lactose-free options now that can, I know we have to do that for my husband and that he tolerates that pretty well. So if it's the lactose specifically, there's a lot of options. You might pay a little bit more for it. Otherwise you can do something like lactate or almond milk or something like that
oh
too.
yeah, I didn't even think about that. You're right though. That does make a big difference. Like
Hmm.
Fairlife or whatever kind, and then the soy or oat milks and things like that.
Hmm.
Um there's so many. I think I'm gonna just say this next one is info on, do you have anything related to type 1 diabetes and weight loss surgery? Any kind of research that you would recommend reading? Somebody was asking about that.
I don't know of anything specifically. I will say, One book that I absolutely love is Glucose Revolution. So I think she's got a more recent book that's kind of a truncated version with more recipes in it. But even following her name's Glucose Goddess on Instagram. So Glucose Goddess Instagram. She's got a lot of great visuals. I feel like a lot of her stuff is more kind of preventative for like type 2 diabetes. So I think with type 1, it gets a little bit more challenging, but I think there's a lot of definitely good takeaways on, how to curb some of those responses. But I would say CGM too, if you have type 1 and you're not using something like CGM, that can be a really, really helpful tool just to help get a little bit more insight and just help be a little bit more intuitive to how those blood sugars are fluctuating with meals and throughout the day. So,
That was actually going to be my question. Like, what
hmm
happens if you do have clients that don't use a CGM? They don't want
hmm
to spend the money on it,
yep,
but they want you to help them.
yeah,
And
yep,
how do you go about that? How do you show people how to be sensitive to knowing what their blood sugar levels are going to
yeah.
be
We
like?
still kind of talk about a lot of the same tactics that we talked about today. So different ways to kind of cushion your carbs. Usually I can look at like what a day of eating looks like and kind of imagine, what their glucose graph might look like. I would say the response is a little bit different because you don't have that personal feedback so much. But we definitely talk about a lot of the same strategies, CGM or not, and kind of chat through how we can mitigate some of those blood sugar spikes. Because, again, whether you're using CGM or not, it really is helpful when you can kind of plane yourself out a little bit.
What would you say somebody's asking, they're 2 years out and they feel like maybe they're concerned that they're not getting enough or getting too much. Um, as far as maybe 1 cup of food able to eat at a meal time, and half of it, if you put as their, they said that half is usually their vegetable or starch, and then a half a cup of meat. Is that normal? And I would just say, what would you say? I would say everything, everybody's bodies are so different, you know?
Yeah, I like to compare it almost to kids. Like if you've seen kids eat, it's like some days they might eat like a bird, and then some days they might just be bottomless pits. And I think, sometimes we can be like that, especially women. I think we tend to have more fluctuations. We talked about, fluctuations with your cycle a little bit. So I think that does have some play on it. Your activity can make a big difference. But I would say consistency too. So depending on your activity, if you notice that, hey, on workout days or the day after, like if you're able to try to eat consistently, not grazing or like snacking continuously, but what I mean is like day to day. I see some people who, if they have maybe a heavy workout routine, they're trying to change how they're eating on workout days versus non-workout days. But really, you've got some recovery involved too. So trying to keep maybe that meal pattern consistent day to day might help tease out some of the trends. But I will say too that volume ranges so much from person to person. So that's a hard question. I don't always love to. I remember being in the clinic and charting and thinking, okay, this patient's at half cup or a cup. And it's like, it's going to depend on, the density of that food. So you're probably going to be able to eat, maybe a couple cups of salad, but, a half a cup of chili or, not saying that those are the measurements that you should be eating, but I think it makes a difference what that meal composition is. So,
Great answer. Thanks, Kayla. And I am going to share my screen because I want to share some of the places that we shared that you can find Kayla. And then I'm also going to share a little bit here on our sponsor because we have some specials going on too. So let's jump over to Kayla's website. It's just KaylaGirgenRD.com. Uh, and again, this will be in the description of this event, so you can find it there if you're listening to a replay. If not, we shared the links on both Facebook and on the webinar. So there, and then if I go here, Kayla Girgen rd.mn.co, and that's choosing your plan. Is it coaching program?
yeah, this is I shared this link in the chat box too, so this shares a little bit more about my bariatric back on track program.
Okay, perfect. And then if you're trying to connect with Kayla to ask questions, you can go to her Instagram, which is just Kayla Girgen RD, which is KaylaGirgenRD. You can find her there. You can also find continuous support and different ideas of things she's sharing each day, that and TikTok. And then she also has a Facebook page, which I had pulled up, but Kayla, since I had to change over to my different account from ProCare, I had to switch that off. Is that just your name?
Yes, it's this. I'm basically Kayla Girgen RD on all the things, I think. But yeah,
Okay.
there might be a new Facebook page coming sh soon. I was sharing with Brenda that tech support isn't real helpful. So yeah, not as active there. So usually most
Uh,
active on Instagram. Yeah.
and then she's starting a YouTube channel, which we have, Kayla Gergen, RDLD, and going to be sharing more and more on there. So, Kayla, that is what I have on yours. Is there any, before I share with about our sponsor and all the specials we have going on now, is there anything you'd like to say as a closing thought on your part?
I don't have anything in particular. I would say, kind of thinking back, it's not like none of this is one size fits all. So I wish I had like something really structured and concrete to, build you up with wild confidence and structure. But I think that ultimately it does take some trial and error, depending on where you're at in your post-op stage too. Just recognizing again that you didn't have surgery on your brain, you didn't have brain surgery, you had surgery on your stomach. And this is really a progression. So I think too that hopefully some of the tips today helped just to, again, gain back some of that mental capacity. So you're able to work on some of those emotional attachments to food if you notice that that's kind of sneaking back. But there is no sexy one size fits all answer. So I think it's good to see what other people are doing for inspiration, but just keep in mind too that no two journeys are the same.
Just being aware that your blood sugar can make a difference in your hunger levels, your snacking levels, overall weight loss, and using that information to make your journey a little easier, I think. And here we go. We have ProCare, which is our sponsor. ProCareNow.com is the website. And today we actually have 20% off all supplements using code PRIME, PRIME 20. If you're listening in a replay later, I'm sorry. It's just short term because we're on Prime days. And you do not have to go to Amazon Prime. You can actually, when you order any products, when you get to the cart and check out, you can actually put in Prime 20. Now, Kayla, I had forgotten too. Kayla is one of our affiliates and she does share her affiliate code. What is your affiliate code if anybody's listening to a replay?
Just Kayla. If you put Kayla
Okay.
in at checkout, that will get you an extra little bit off.
Yes, Kayla's is, I think it's 10%. 10%.
Yes. Yep.
So if regardless whether you're live or on the replay, you can get discounts here. I'm going to go ahead and type those two, Prime 20 for Kayla, just for 10%. So either one of those is great. And I also want to say, because I don't know that you can actually use both of them. We had somebody ask that this morning in our admin team said it has to be one or the other. So try either one, see which one works for you, best for you. I want to also just say, guys, on the ProCare Health page, if you go over to our Bari Connected tab and you do the drop down, you're going to find some different resources on there. The first one there is our Bari Connected page, and I'm just going to point that out because we do have some more resources. Kayla's program today will be on replay until the end of this month. So if you go on there and you want to listen to the on-demand replay, all you got to do is click onto that and it'll allow you to go straight to the replay almost immediately after the program. Sometimes it takes about 10 minutes or 15 minutes for it to, I guess, fully download the file, but usually very quickly it's available. So you can listen to that if you want to come back and like get some more insight. And because sometimes it was a lot of information to take in. The other thing I want to say is if you want to register for any of the other events for this month, feel free to do so. We also have a support group this week Dr. Kukraja, who is from a Dallas program. He is a bariatric surgeon, and he's going to be talking about frequently asked questions and answers about bariatric surgery. When you register, you can put your questions in, and we're going to try to get to as many as we can. That is tomorrow, which is July 18th at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then Kayla, is your workshop? Kayla and Rodolfo just did a workshop 15th. Is that available at all or on replay?
Yes, I am happy to send out the replay if you just on Instagram, if you DM me your um email address, I'll also put my email in the chat box here. So if you have any follow-up questions or if you're interested in that replay, I will add you to the list for that.
And that is Conquering All or Nothing Thinking, Mastering Setbacks After Bariatric Surgery. And how long will that replay be available? That was July 15th.
It's available. We have it posted on YouTube right now. So if you, yeah, shoot me your email and then I can send it over.
Okay, perfect. And I also just want to mention ProCare also has a YouTube channel. It is on the ProCare Health YouTube channel, and we have over 300 videos there. I'll pop on that in a moment. We also have a Facebook page and a Facebook group that you can click onto our Bari Connected page here and find both of those. So I'll pull up, and we also have a podcast. So if you listen to podcast on any podcast station, whether it be iHeartRadio, Spotify, whatever, we put all of our downloads of these events on there as well. So you can go on there if you're kind of like, I like listening while I'm driving or while I'm walking or working out. But so on the podcast, it is under Bari Space Connected, and under our YouTube channel, it is ProCare Health Vitamins and Supplements. So just a little different. Okay. Stop sharing there. And okay. Looks like we have all kinds of great stuff there. Keep sharing. And Kayla, I'm going to copy your email. That way I can put it on Facebook too as well.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, I just want to thank everybody for their time, their energy. What you guys are doing by being here on these calls is incredible, because what happens is the best version of you is showing up for all of those other people that you're with, whether it be your family, your significant other, your children, your coworkers. When you're the best version of yourself and you're taking care of yourself in spending the time to be that best version, you just radiate it out, and you make a difference in many other people's lives. Many times you don't even realize what that looks like. So thank you. And I'm going to just say a big goodbye. Kayla, you want to say goodbye too?
All
And
right.
wish you
Bye.
all the
Yes.
best.
Thank you for spending your time with us this afternoon. So we appreciate you.
Yes. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.